publicly oppose Measure 2648, the repeal of the temporary Multnomah County income tax prior to its scheduled expiration. Thank you.
So I invite comments for and against. Bill Kramer, Board of Governors, is our timekeeper. 1 minute or less, please, and Bill has no mercy.
Cy Cornroad, City Club member. I'm also a board member of the Multnomah Education Service District. We do not get direct money from the I-tax. However, it permits our constituent districts to buy in and keep the outdoor school program, which is environmental education, going. Without that, we would lose that, and that is one of the best programs that we have for teaching kids about environmental concerns. Thank you.
Tamsin, against.
Tamsin Wassell, City Club member. I think my friends and colleagues on the Board of Governors and the Research Board would be disappointed if I didn't get up and speak against this resolution. As you know, this is a membership resolution. It is not being forwarded from the Research Board, and the research was not done on it. The reason why research would not be done on it is because it would be against previous positions that the City Club has taken on tax reform. We have made explicit statements saying that taxes should be progressive, not regressive. This is a regressive tax. We have made explicit criteria saying that the tax should be efficient in the way that it is collected, and as you know, over 20% of the population has not submitted their taxes, and we will be spending extra dollars in order to collect this. I want you to know personally that I was so zealous in paying this tax last year that I got a notice yesterday saying that I had overpaid them and I'm getting a refund. And I have not personally decided whether I will vote for this or not. I probably will vote against the repeal of it. My position is the City Club should not be taking positions that are not based on research.
Ray.
Ray Polani, a City Club member. I just want to say that you get what you pay for, or you don't get what you don't pay for.
Yeah, my name is Marsden Smith. I'm a member. And again, as I said a year ago, I mean, if this thing is approved and we recommend it, we are just being apologists, and we are allowing our legislators to, for lack of leadership, and our governor, for lack of leadership, for them to get away with not making decisions and providing the powerful leadership they need to do. So I oppose this, and I encourage everybody else to oppose it too.
Kurt.
Kurt Webering, City Club member. I was just talking to a middle school child, lives on my block, and she told me that she's in a class with 33 students. And I'm wondering if we should vote this down, what that ratio would be. We supported this a year ago. It was based on research at that time, and so we're just following the path of a well-trodden path that we presented last year, which was, this is a good tax, let's keep it up.
Yes, against?
My name is Don Smith. I'm a new member to the City Club, but in the last year, since we did vote in this tax, a lot of things have come to light that the County Commission has done. I'm on the Multnomah County Citizens Advisory Commission, and I can tell you that there is a lot of things that we can be funding less and put priority on schools. We would need this Multnomah County income tax. There are a lot of things that the county is spending money on first and then leaving schools out as the last thing to hold over our heads. And I'm vigorously opposing the I-tax, and I'll be supporting the repeal.
Erwin Mandel, City Club member. I also happen to be a member of the District Attorney's Citizen Budget Advisory Committee, and this tax goes beyond schools. Our county criminal justice system is functioning at times by a bare thread. The money raised by this I-tax to support the criminal justice system in Multnomah County is badly needed. We need not repeal this tax.
Thank you. 4, Jane.
Jane Sees, member of the City Club, and I guess we're going to give credentials, former chair of the Senate Revenue Committee in the legislature. I guess I'd like to say two things. Let's get real. In reality, I don't think the legislature is about to do anything about the tax system, because I believe the voters in Oregon are totally split about how they want to reform it. Until we can get to a point in the public where that can happen, I think we better get real about the fact that we're taking it out on the kids of Multnomah County schools if we don't do something about supporting this tax and keeping it from being repealed. And I hope we will all support the resolution. Thank you.
Okay.
Bill Parrish, City Club member, and I'll also vote to repeal the tax. And I'd also hope that the City Club, if you look at the whole economic picture, would look at some other things too. One of the expenses that's really impacted schools and other organizations is the 50% increase in utility expense. So maybe if we looked at that too, and the notion that taxes being collected by our local utility aren't even coming back, they're never going to be paid, that might be something to look at too.
Thank you. Call for the question. Okay, Ray, you have.
May I just give you
a
another
momentary
quick
comment?
quote? No free lunch.
All right. The question has been called for. It's now time to proceed with the vote. Will all those who are in favor of the City Club's position on this issue please raise your voting cards? And those opposed? All right, it is clearly passed by a large majority. Thank you very much. And thank you, Chris. Now it's time to get on with our debate. If you would all be good enough to turn off your cell phones and other electronic devices, I'd be most appreciative. I'd like to introduce our moderator today, who is Mike Burton. He was, I'm sorry, I just caught sight of Patty Tillett in sunglasses and I've just lost it. Anyway, sorry about that. Mike Burton, and I think it's very appropriate, was formerly the CEO of Metro for the last 8 years, and so he will be our moderator today. Mike is currently serving as Vice Provost and Executive Director of Extended Studies at Portland State University. Mike?
Thank you, Corleen. Gentlemen, you're going to be running for an office that the public has very little understanding of and probably less appreciation for, and yet you're responsible for the about $1 billion worth of public assets. You distribute hundreds of millions of dollars worth of dollars every year for various public works, and you're responsible also for giving direction for the future for about 1.5 million people in this region. And you're doing this in a time of economic uncertainty, and one in which I think the public is concerned about just leadership in general. So I want to say how pleased I am that you are running for this office, seconded only by how pleased I am that I am not. I want to thank, before we get going, I'd like to thank Greg Reisman and Ross Williams, also Wendy Rodemaker-Willis, for helping to form the questions today that we're going to be asking. This debate will have several sections. First, each candidate will give a 3-minute opening statement. A coin toss determine the order of occurrence in this debate prior to the meeting. Following the opening statements, candidates will respond to questions suggested of this meeting by City Club members. A question writing committee can pose a final set of questions. These are the only questions that will be asked today. There will be no questions from the floor, but Ray Polani, I want to assure you that there is a question on transportation. We will rely on the judgment of our distinguished panel of City Club members, seated here to the side, to decide whether or not the questions have indeed been answered by the candidates. If 2 or more of these members raise the cards that you would be raising, if 2 or more raise their cards, then they will decide whether or not the question has actually been answered by the candidates. If they feel the question has not been answered, I will restate the question and ask the candidate to reply again. If 2 more of these board members raise their cards indicating the question hasn't been stated, you'll have 30 seconds to reply once again to reform your question. And if you don't answer it the second time, then I'm sure the press will take note and we'll take away your cookies for dessert. Following the club's questions, each candidate will have an opportunity to ask 3 questions of each other. Following a rotation of candidates' questions, each candidate will make a 3-minute closing statement. Please be respectful. Please hold all applause until the end of the program. Bill Kramer, sitting here in front of me and will be sitting next to me, will be the timekeeper, and he will be signaling me when the time is up for each question. He also has this huge bell down here that he can ring, I guess. Hopefully you can hear it. Before we get started, I want to briefly introduce each of our candidates. I'll introduce them in alphabetical order. Robert Liberty is a native Portlander and graduate of the University of Oregon, Oxford University, and Harvard Law School. He served on Metro's Future Vision Commission, his neighborhood board, and advisory subcommittee working on the Willamette waterfront. He has represented citizens and citizen groups around the state before local governments, in Oregon's courts, and in the legislature, and has served as a land use hearings officer for Multnomah County. He's also convened a new regional coalition that works for affordable housing and reinvestment in poor neighborhoods while protecting natural areas. Rod Monroe served on the Metro Council from 1992 to 1996, and again beginning in July 1998. In 1999, he served as a council's presiding officer. He also has served as a state representative, state senator, and teacher in both high schools and college. In addition to his responsibilities at Metro, Monroe serves on the Governor's Advisory Committee on DUII, Multnomah County Advisory Committee on DUII, and the Board of Directors of FISH, Emergency Services. He is Vice President of the Warner Pacific College Foundation Board and Board of Trustees, and Chair of the Linwood Church Board of Deacons. So I'm going to go down to the table here. I'd like to ask the candidates to approach the podiums, and we'll begin with our opening statements. Mr. Monroe, would you begin?
Thank you very much. First of all, let me thank the City Club for having this debate. I believe it's the first ever debate between two candidates for Metro Council, so maybe we're not going to be the Rodney Dangerfield of governments for long. We're getting recognized. I'd also like to thank Congressman Wu for coming, and several of my colleagues on the Metro Council are also here, and many friends. You know, Metro is the only elected regional government in the nation, and yet we've had quite a success story. In 1977, I served on the House Committee, Local Government Committee, along with Rick Gustafson and chaired by Glenn Otto, that wrote the first Metro Charter and put it on the ballot the next year, and the voters said yes, and Metro came into being. And for 25 years, we've been the only elected regional government in the nation, and we've had quite a success. The first job that Metro had to do was to close St. John's landfill and find someplace else to put our garbage. And they succeeded in doing that where the legislature had failed time and time and time again. Because of our work with solid waste, the Portland area now is the #1 recycling city in all of the United States. And we're not satisfied. We're working harder to increase that recycling rate. In 1992, the voters approved Metro's Home Rule Charter and clarified our role in land use and transportation planning. We also built and own and operate the Convention Center in 2 phases, and I believe it is the nicest, most attractive convention center anywhere in the United States. We took over Expo from Multnomah County when it was a bunch of falling down cow barns, and have rebuilt it into a fine, modern exhibition hall. We took over the Oregon Zoo from the city of Portland when it was a bunch of cages with animals, and now it is a modern, attractive zoo that specializes in endangered species. In 1995, we asked the voters to pass a bond for open space acquisition, and the voters approved that 60%, and we've bought over 8,000 acres of open space. During the 90s, we wrote the 2040 plan for compact urban design, a plan that's being studied now by cities from all over the world. We have built a system of bikeways that is second to none in this country, and as a result, for 4 years in a row, we've been rated the most bicycle-friendly city in the United States. I'm proud of the accomplishments of Metro, both before and during my term, but we still have much to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Monroe. Mr. Liberty?
It's a pleasure to be here to discuss the nation's most important and only race for regional council. I think what Metro does is tremendously important and exciting. Metro's choices about where and how we grow are not just decisions about whether we save or develop farmland. They are also, in effect, decisions on where we spend our limited tax dollars. Do we reinvest in existing neighborhoods, or do we spend money for new roads and sewers and schools for new subdivisions? These choices determine where families can afford to live in the region, and therefore the kind of school their children will attend. And that, of course, is a decision that will affect those children's future. Metro's transportation decisions aren't just about congestion. They're also about whether we focus or disperse development, how clean our air is or how polluted it is, how we move freight, and of course, they're life-shaping decisions for the 25% of us in the region who don't have a driver's license. That's the reason why Metro is important, and these are the reasons I want to run for Metro. I bring more than 20 years of experience, leadership, creativity, and energy to the mission of protecting and enhancing our quality of life. In the 80s at Thousand Friends of Oregon, I helped protect 25 million acres of farm and forest land from large lot residential development. In the 80s, late 80s and early 90s, I played a leadership role in finding a non-highway alternative to a proposed highway through Washington County, an alternative that was adopted and which won national awards. In the mid-90s, I brought together a coalition of many groups that had not been asked to participate in Metro's planning effort and brought new perspectives to the table and helped shape that plan so it benefited more people. And then just 2 years ago, I brought together realtors, developers, environmentalists, transportation reformers to see if we couldn't design a new model livable community in the Damascus area for 100,000 people and 80,000 new jobs. It is this combination of experience, leadership, energy, and new ideas that I want to bring to the Metro Council.
Thank you, Mr. Liberty. We will now move to the portion of the program where I'll ask the questions prepared in advance by the City Club members. Each candidate will have 60 seconds to respond to the question. Following each answer, the opposing candidate will have the option of a 45-second rebuttal. The candidates have not seen these questions in advance. First question goes to Mr. Liberty. In terms of how we manage waste, state law prioritizes the strategies of reduce, reuse, recycle in that order. Our region has one of the highest levels of recycling in the country. However, we seem to pay less attention to reducing waste in the first place. How do you think Metro could make headway in reducing waste?
It's a great question because we have focused so much on on recycling, not enough at preventing the need to recycle. I think there's a number of ways if we look at connections. Here's one. I see a lot of green lawns during a dry summer. That means we're using water, and we're also producing yard debris, and then we're requiring it to be collected. I think if we take our conservation strategies and put them together, which have to do with how we grow and where we grow, how we use limited resources like water, we can reduce waste and reduce costs. So that's one example, tie new ideas together to reduce waste.
One of the ways that we can reduce waste is through construction and demolition debris and recycling much of what is gleaned from tearing down old buildings, the brick, many times the furnishings, the doorknobs, and so on can be reused. But one of the things we're working on right now that I think is most critical is food waste. And one of the issues that I am trying to get my teeth into, literally, is garbage disposals. When people put their food waste down a garbage disposal, it goes into our sewer system, and that is the most expensive way to deal with that waste. Instead, we should be composting it and using it in a progressive way.
I think there's a question raised by the panel that you perhaps didn't respond to the direct question, which was making headway in reducing waste. You have 30 seconds.
Well, I thought I tackled that when I talked about construction debris, reselling old parts of old buildings, parts of old houses, grinding up old aggregate and using it for new road beds. That's a way to reduce waste.
Okay. This question begins with Mr. Monroe. When voters think of Metro, they most often think of the urban growth boundary. However, that is only one of many possible mechanisms to control growth. Metro could be used in planning growth, the urban growth boundary. What are some of the other strategies Metro should be considering to plan growth and reduce sprawl?
Well, one of the things that the 2040 plan calls for is to plan growth around centers and around light rail and other transit stops, and to increase the density around those stops and multi-use functions so that people can have the option of living in a situation where they don't need to use a car, where they may be in a townhouse or in an apartment that is near a light rail stop, that is near shops, that is near restaurants, and that enables them to live a different kind of lifestyle than the typical single-family neighborhood.
Mr. Liberty?
I think our transportation investments are just as important as the urban growth boundary. If we reinforce and reinvest in existing roads, if we extend light rail, then we're going to have a very different, less sprawling pattern of development than if we build new freeways and expand the boundary. I also think Metro can provide incentives for model kinds of new development that give more people choices to live in ways that are both efficient in the use of land, but give choices of where to live, and also make our urban environment greener, so we can have green new development that provides more choices.
Okay, this question starts with Mr. Liberty. Like many urban areas in the country, housing prices in the region have steeply escalated over the past 10 years, placing the purchase of a home beyond the reach of many families. Please tell us what Metro can and should be doing to keep housing prices affordable for families.
The first thing Metro shouldn't do is assume that expanding the boundary will make housing affordable. I happened to check the National Association of Realtors website, and I found these numbers. In Portland, the median home price is $207,000. In Denver, it's $242,000. In Las Vegas, $269,000, and in San Diego, it's $559,000. So more land does not make housing more affordable. The second thing is I think we need to focus on providing more opportunities for high-quality multifamily and rental housing all around the region. You're not going to build affordable housing even if land is free at $150 a square foot. Metro can help with land conservancies, which provide land for new development, and Metro can use some of its regional transportation money to help provide an incentive for the kind of mixed-use development that provides housing opportunities and places for new jobs.
We ought to be doing everything we possibly can do to encourage people to become homeowners. Homeowners are good citizens. Not everybody can be a homeowner, but homeowners generally are good citizens. I work with Rose Community Development that finds ways of subsidizing people so that they can become first-time homeowners. I think that is outstanding. But my opponent, of course, has come down on the side of opposing the federal income tax deduction for mortgage. That would discourage homeownership.
This question starts with Mr. Monroe. What is your definition of a balanced transportation system? What would you do to ensure adequate funding of all components of that system?
Well, a balanced transportation system includes a network of bikeways that are interconnected. We have over 10,000 people a day in this city that commute to work by bicycle. It includes a transit system based on a light rail framework with streetcar and busways that is accessible to everybody. And it includes major highways and roads that work because freight moves on roads and highways. Freight can't move on light rail or bikeways, and freight movement is critical to the economy of this region.
Mr. Liberty?
Well, one thing we can't do is promise we're going to build more of everything for everybody. We've got a $7 trillion deficit thanks to the Bush administration, and the flow of federal money I think is going to be less. My priority in transportation is fix it first, then increase choices by building light rail where it makes sense, and which places where the stops can be the focus for development. As a bike commuter, I certainly would like to see a little more expenditure on paint. That's all it takes to create stripes for where we need to travel. And I think we need to make sure that our community design is such that people have a choice of walking to the store to get a pint of milk instead of spending a pint of gas driving to the mall 2 miles away.
This question goes to Mr. Liberty. What should Metro be doing, excuse me, what should Metro be doing to protect fish and wildlife habitat and green space within the urban growth boundary?
When the 2040 growth concept was adopted about 10 years ago, a key element was that we were going to balance increase of density with greenery in the city, with natural areas, with space for wildlife, because I think it's important for children to be able to see nature, not by getting on a bus or flying, but by walking down the street. So there needs to be a combination of acquisition, using the money that has already been expended, and more if the voters approve it, and through sensible regulations that respect property values but also conserve the resources, clean water, fish, wildlife, that belong really to all of us.
Mr. Monroe?
Thank you. I've actually been working on this issue for some time. I remember when I was in the legislature and the state senate, we used to decry the farmers and the foresters for polluting all the streams. But some of the most polluted streams are right here in our urban area. I directed scarce MTIP money as chair of JPAC to rebuild 162nd and Foster so that the culvert there that fish could not pass through is now being replaced by a bridge. And so we're having salmonoids, salmon and others that are now spawning up Kelly Creek. And I've also worked very closely with Solve in planting trees that'll shade Johnson Creek so that fish habitat is improved.
Okay, this is a question to you, Ms. Monroe. In 1995, voters approved a $135 million bond measure, which resulted in the purchase of over 8,000 acres of trails and open space for the region. Should Metro ask voters for a second round of dollars to buy more land for open spaces? And are there ways in which Metro could make these open spaces more useful and accessible to the public?
In 1995, when I worked on the campaign to pass that bond measure, that $135 million bond measure, we were criticized because it did not include any money for development, making the lands that we bought more accessible to the public. We said we will work on that. We promised the voters that the whole 135 would be spent on acquisition only. Recently, the Metro Council, with my approval, voted for a slight increase in our solid waste tax to use to start developing those 8,000 acres, providing for trailheads and opening them up to the public. Now that we have done that, I am in favor of going back to the voters for phase 2, perhaps in 2006, and asking them for another, perhaps slightly smaller bond that would allow us to continue the acquisition program, because the best way to protect fragile lands along streams and on the tops of hills is to buy it.
Mr. Liberty?
I also would support going back to the voters if and when they're ready for another bond measure. This time I think it should provide funds for developing, making these areas accessible, for restoration, and we need to again make sure that includes a whole spectrum of green spaces, things right down to the neighborhood level, as well as large open areas at the edge.
This question starts with Mr. Liberty. Emerging issues like increased traffic congestion are being driven in part by communities outside of Metro's sprawling towards the urban growth boundary. How would you work with the neighboring communities that fall outside the bounds of Metro, but are essential partners in fulfilling Metro's long-term vision while preserving the quality of life in those communities?
We are all part of one region in the northern Willamette Valley and the Willamette Valley as a whole. In fact, that was one of the reasons that I brought people together for this study, The Future of the Willamette Valley, and I served on the advisory committee looking at transportation futures for the entire valley. First thing is people need to understand our interrelationship. There's, I think, 20 to 50,000 commuters a day between Portland and Salem. So I think the first step is to share the knowledge to show that we have to succeed as one region. Second, we need to have a more integrated approach, just like what is beginning to be done in the region, about how we spend transportation dollars at the state level. And I think ODOT Region 1 can help us with that. Third thing is I think we need to be sensitive about how fast change occurs when we build transportation improvements to a place like McMinnville, because they can easily become a commuter community, and that may not be what's in the best interest for them.
Mr. Monroe?
First of all, we need to continue to do something that we're already doing, and that is to develop intergovernmental agreements with some of those satellite cities to promote separation, maintain and protect separation, rural reserves between Gresham and Sandy, between Oregon City and Canby, between Portland and Scappoose, and so on. We're doing that. We need to do more of it. But in addition, it's very, very important if we're going to continue this process that we not close our doors and drive all of the growth out into these satellite cities where they have to commute hours to get to their job. We have to provide for new people that want to live within the Portland metro area and provide them with a choice of housing.
This question starts with to Mr. Monroe. By charter, the primary function of Metro is planning. How do you intend to find an adequate level of funding for planning over the next 10 years, and what are the potential sources of revenue to do that?
As the home builders know, I've been working on that for more than 10 years. In fact, at one time I suggested a small a tax on new development dedicated exclusively to planning. Every budget year that we've come, I have added to the planning budget, constantly been vigilant on proposals by you, Mr. Burton, when you were executive director, or by Mr. Bragdon when he was presiding officer, and I felt like the cuts were too deep in planning. Planning is our #1 function. It must be adequately funded. We can use existing resources and direct them there, or we can continue to look for new resources.
Mr. Liberty?
It is Metro's most important work. I have experience running a nonprofit with $1 million budget, and I always had to find ways to become leaner and more efficient because not everyone was willing to be as generous as they thought they should be in making contributions. I think that's the mood the taxpayers are in. So the first priority is going to be adaptable and efficient, find ways of partnering, including with non-government organizations that can help with planning, both at the neighborhood level and the regional level. If there was going to be a source of funding, I would tap the vast increase in value that comes when the urban growth boundary is expanded. Take a little bit of that and plow it back into things like planning, green spaces, affordable housing, and transportation.
This question first goes to Mr. Liberty. There are increasing calls for shovel-ready industrial land in order to stimulate economic growth. Some people are calling for an expansion of the urban growth boundary to increase available industrial land. Others are arguing that we should convert land within the urban growth boundary to make it usable for new industrial development. What is the most appropriate strategy for ensuring that there is adequate industrial land available?
As most of you know, the Metro Council already voted to add another 1,800 acres to the boundary, but they did that without even determining whether it might have been more cost-effective to redevelop and consolidate parcels closer to jobs, closer to housing and transportation already inside the boundary. Those new shovel-ready sites supposedly are going to require roads and sewers and fire protection and police protection. Is that less or more expensive than reusing underused sites already in the boundary? Well, we don't know that. And that's the first thing I would have looked to see. We need jobs, we need livable wage jobs, but the better thing is to place them near the heart of the region, not at the edge of the region.
Mr. Monroe?
2 years ago, Professor Ethan Seltzer came out with his report, and that report said we were very short of 50-acre or greater industrial sites, and unless we did something about it, we were shoving jobs off to Arizona and Las Vegas. And so we took that to heart in our recent expansion of the urban growth boundary. But we also looked within the urban growth boundary and identified regionally significant industrial lands to be protected for industrial activities, not converted to commercial, big box, retail, or strip malls.
The final question goes to Mr. Monroe, starting there. Metro was reorganized with approval of the voters. The intent of the reorganization was to move the day-to-day management of the government to an administrator, thus allowing the council to develop larger policy initiatives. Is this working, and if not, why?
Well, yes, I believe it is working. You made that proposal, Mr. Burton, and I was the chair of the committee that drafted that proposal and put it on the ballot, and the voters approved it. Now Metro doesn't have two heads, it has one head. Everybody knows where to go to. The council has the policy-making authority. The reason that I say that this program is very successful primarily lies with the choice of Michael Jordan as our chief operating officer. He is ideally suited for that job because of his background and because of the kinds of things that he's able to do. He's a wonderful negotiator, he's a wonderful manager, and he makes Metro a better place.
Mr. Liberty?
Well, normally I'd say two heads are better than one, but Not in this case. I think it is better to combine the legislative and executive function, and I think Metro has been better for the change.
Okay, during this portion of the program, each candidate will have the opportunity to ask 3 questions of each other. Questions must be asked in 30 seconds. The opposing candidate will have 1 minute to respond, after which the questioner will have the option of a 30-second rebuttal. We will alternate between the candidates, beginning with Rod Monroe. Mr. Monroe, your first question of Mr. Liberty.
Thank you. Mr. Liberty, Metro's regional transportation plan calls for building more bikeways, more boulevards with sidewalks, more light rails, streetcars, and busways, but it also calls for major highway improvements to I-5, I-205, the Sunset Highway, 217, and to new highways in the Sunrise Corridor and the I-599W connector. Which of these highway projects, if any, do you support and why?
We don't have the money, and I think it's a bad strategy to build a $300 million highway through Clackamas County. And I question these highway projects. It sounds like something out of the 1960s. We're not going to build our way out of congestion, and the most recent report from the Texas Transportation Institute confirms that the best strategy is a balanced one. My priorities are fix it first, potholes before new highways. Second, increase transportation choices for people who don't have driver's licenses, and that includes walking, biking, light rail, buses, and streetcar. And then at certain points, we're going to need new roads, but those ought to be boulevards. I don't believe that we need more freeways to follow in the path of Houston, a region that I think is not a success.
Well,
Monroe,
it's
you have 30
interesting.
seconds to rebut.
We have massive congestion right now because I-5 Delta Park bottleneck, which is 2 lanes and needs to be 3, because the Sunset Highway needs to be expanded, because 217 needs to have its interchanges fixed, because 205 is congested all the way from Oregon City to I-5. If we don't fix those problems, freight will not be able to move, the economy of this region will dry up, and we'll become a ghost town.
Mr. Liberty, your first question to Mr. Monroe.
Mr. Monroe, that was a very impressive list of new transportation projects, light rail, things to handle freight, new freeways, widening existing freeways. I know that widening Sunset Highway for 1 mile costs $70 million. I want to know, how much does that project list cost, and where's the money coming from?
Well, we have about $7 billion in transportation needs in this region. The money obviously has to come from state, and the state has in recent years passed OTIA 1, 2, and 3, and some of that money is being spent in this area, but it also has to come from the federal government. Our relationship with our congressional delegation is very important in order to get money for all kinds of transportation projects, including some of those highway improvements that are so critical to freight mobility.
Liberty, 30 seconds to respond.
I repeat, we didn't hear a list of the cost of the projects, and I believe there's not close to the amount of money to pay for that. There's going to be some tough choices made. We ought to be focusing on fixing what we have, and then strategic investments that deal with a few bottlenecks in freight movement. That's the realistic approach in the coming years.
Mr. Monroe, your second question to Mr. Liberty.
Yes, my second question. During a newspaper interview last spring, in your response to a question by the League of Women Voters, you advocated threatening to withhold federal transportation dollars to force local communities to meet Metro's affordable housing goals. How do you think this region's cities and counties would respond to such a threat?
Well, let's see. I've been endorsed by Charlotte Lehan, Mayor of Wilsonville. I've been endorsed by Judy Hammerstad, the Mayor of Lake Oswego. I've been endorsed by Ed Dennis, Hillsborough City Councilor. I've been endorsed by Oregon City City Commissioners Doug Neely and Bob Bailey. I've been endorsed by Dick Scouten, Washington County Commissioners. So obviously, they don't find it very threatening. What they recognize is that affordable housing is a serious issue. It's a regional issue, and we've got to get beyond just talking. When light rail is extended, as you yourself have mentioned, Councilor Monroe, you tie it to provision of affordable housing. It's a simple matter of logic and fairness that one of the reasons we drive so much is because people can't find housing near where their work is because it's not affordable. I think it's fair and logical to say, look, if you're going to get transportation money, you've got to be part of the solution by making sure that there are more affordable housing opportunities near those jobs.
And do I get a 30-second?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, my whole political career, I've believed that you catch more flies with honey than with vinegar, and you ought to use the carrot more than the stick. I think threatening local communities to withhold their federal transportation dollars will make them so angry at Metro that they may decide they don't need Metro at all.
Mr. Liberty, your second question, Mr. Monroe?
Oregonians in Action has been working alone and in partnership with others like Bill Sizemore for almost 20 years to weaken or dismantle Oregon's land use planning laws. In 2002, Oregonians in Action put a measure on the ballot that would effectively cripple Metro's ability to plan for growth. Yet according to this week's Willamette Week, your campaign sought Oregonians in Action's endorsement. Why?
Well, first of all, it's not true. I have never talked to Mr. Honeycutt in my life. I have opposed everything he stands for. I did not talk to him, so I couldn't have asked him for anything. And Willamette Week is going to do a retraction next week. They apologized to me and my campaign manager for not checking out their story. I believe Mr. Honeycutt gave them false information, and that was the basis of that story. I am opposed to Measure 37. I strongly opposed Measure 7. I have opposed everything that Oregonians in Action has ever put forward and will continue to do so. If you read the list of the opponents of Measure 37, you'll see my name prominently on there.
Mr. Liberty, 30 seconds.
I'll look forward to that retraction and clarification. I have to say, I know Dave Honeycutt, although I wouldn't count him as one of my friends, and I find a little hard to imagine he'd simply make up the whole thing out of whole cloth. And I did ask whether your campaign had asked for the endorsement, not you personally.
And my campaign did not ask for an endorsement either. My understanding is that there was a person without my approval. By the way, somebody asked me, why don't you call Honeycutt and see if he'll give you some money? I said, no, I will never talk to that man. Somebody without my approval, I believe, did call him and ask for a political contribution, but not for an endorsement.
Mr. Liberty, you want to respond to that since that was a...
Well, I think it's interesting. We expect a certain amount of flexibility in candidates, but if someone connected with your campaign thought Oregonians in Action was a suitable source of contributions, then I have to wonder whether or not you really are committed to protecting and enhancing our quality of life.
Mr. Monroe, your final question of Mr. Liberty.
Thank you. Mr. Liberty, in a speech in Montana about 2 years ago on smart growth, you called zoning that protects single-family neighborhoods from added density and commercial establishments, quote, bad zoning. How can Portland neighborhoods protect their character and their uniqueness without such zoning laws?
I am very impressed you took the time to read a speech I gave in Montana, first of all. The reason I objected to that, and actually the whole speech, was about when communities use zoning to separate people by class. That's not just about single-family residences, but it's about creating opportunity for people to live in different neighborhoods, and I think that is a foundation of a livable community. I think that kind of zoning out of people so that you only have large lots and big houses separates people, drives the community apart, and that's the kind of thing I've objected to. I believe we need to have more communities where people feel comfortable living together, where there's more choices in both housing and transportation.
Stack 'em and pack 'em.
Mr. Liberty, your final question of Mr. Monroe.
Public confidence in elected officials is low in large part, I think, because people think public officials use their powers to do favors for big campaign contributors. I've voluntarily limited contributions from people who have business before Metro who are going to be enriched by Metro Council decisions to $50. I know you're proud of your work trying to establish an ethical standard at Metro. I now ask you to join me in this self-imposed campaign contribution limit.
Mr. Monroe.
Well, you know, I have support from a broad base of people. Virtually every union, from the most liberal to the most conservative in this region, has endorsed my reelection. Virtually every substantial business group has endorsed my reelection. It is a little unusual in politics, don't you think, that one candidate, who, and I happen to be a lifelong Democrat, gets the support of labor and business almost universally in the same election. And I get money from both of them and from any other sources. My vote cannot be bought. I was the author of the toughest ethics law in the state, but I do receive contributions from whoever thinks this race is important and wants to invest in it.
Mr. Liberty?
Well, in fact, according to the report you filed on Wednesday, in the last reporting period, you had exactly 23 contributions totaling $27,400, and $20,000 of that came from 4 sources: political action committees and the development company that have a direct stake in expansion of the urban growth boundaries. In the same period, I received contributions from 200 different people, everyone from developers and environmentalists to entrepreneurs, conservationists. I think we do need an ethical standard, or people will think that Metro Council votes are for sale.
Thank you, gentlemen. We'll now move to the final portion of the program. You've both been very good, and your answers been pretty terse. So we're going to allow each of you 5 minutes to do your closing statements from each of you. We'll begin with Rod Monroe.
Yeah, you know, this election is about good Metro versus bad Metro. This election is about whether Metro will be a positive or a negative force in the economic revitalization of this region. You know, our economy is hurting. We have the highest unemployment rate in the nation. So we need to take actions that will stimulate the economic development of this region. There are some good things about Metro. Metro works best when it works collaboratively. I served for virtually my entire career at Metro on JPAC, and I chaired JPAC for 5 years. JPAC is a Joint Policy Advisory Committee on Transportation. What it is made up of is regional leaders and Metro councilors that come together and work out their differences and decide on one set of transportation priorities: light rail, streetcar, roads and highways, boulevards, bikeways, and so on. We all agree. The vote is almost always unanimous. Then I had the opportunity 4 years in a row to lead that delegation back to Washington, D.C., and we'd stop in and see David Wu and Earl Blumenauer and Ron Wyden and Gordon Smith and Darlene Hooley and Brian Baird, and they thanked us for doing their hard work for them. Because when JPAC works that way, it means that the congressman doesn't have to choose between these constituents or these constituents. We've already done that work for them. That is Metro at its best, but some people would like to see JPAC made into just an advisory committee and give all of the power to essentially override veto back to the Metro Council. I think that would be a dangerous precedent. We need to continue to build a transportation system, a multifaceted transportation system in this region. If we rely only on transit or only on bikeways or only on roads and highways, we're doing it the wrong way. We're the transportation hub of the Pacific Northwest. We sit geographically at one end of the Columbia River Gorge, where barges come from hundreds of miles inland and connect with ocean-going vessels. Those ocean-going vessels have to be able to get in here. That's why I supported channel deepening. And we sit where 2 interstate highways come together, major rail lines. We're a transportation hub. And for a transportation hub to work, we have to continue developing it, refining it, building it. Yes, we have to fix the Delta Park bottleneck. Yes, we have to make some highway improvements, but the transit improvements are equally critical. We must protect Portland's neighborhoods. I knock on doors every day and people tell me that they value and pride themselves in their neighborhood. You know, they don't want to see their neighborhood jammed with commercial activities or apartments next door. They want the makeup of their single-family residential neighborhoods protected. We must do more to promote tourism. We had a major role, of course, in building the convention center and expo, and also in getting the legislature to put more money into promoting tourism. But we have to do more to find a way to build a headquarters hotel so that we can utilize that wonderful convention center that we have built. We have to do more to attract family wage jobs to this region. And that means we have to have industrial sites for those people to settle in. Ethan Seltzer was right. And so sometimes we do need to find industrial sites outside the urban growth boundary, not prime farmland, but exception land that works. It's absolutely critical that Metro lean on the side of, again, honey, not vinegar, that Metro work with collaboration and cooperation, not litigation and intimidation, that we foster regional partnerships with our 24 cities and 3 counties and across the river, and I was one of the authors of the bi-state movement, so across the river with Clark County is equally important. It's the only way for Metro to succeed in its mission. If we try to get heavy-handed and use a club on folks, we will fail, Metro will fail, and the economy of this region will fail.
Mr. Liberty?
Metro Charter states planning and policy making to enhance and protect our quality of life and our environment for present and future generations is Metro's most important public service. The question for the voters in District 6 is which candidate is best qualified to protect and enhance our quality of life in the new century. My esteemed opponent has been on the Metro Council since 1992 and in government service for almost a quarter of a century, and I think we ought to acknowledge and thank him for his service in the region. But the challenges of the 20th century are behind us. The times have changed, and Metro needs to change too. In the new century, we're facing new challenges to our economy. Our jobs, both white-collar and manufacturing, are going to Asia. There are challenges in many of our new neighborhoods. The good news is that neighborhoods in Portland are very successful in a way we couldn't have imagined 20 years ago. But now the question will be whether working families can continue to find a place to live in these neighborhoods, or ultimately whether they can find a place to live near jobs in the suburbs. The new challenges are confronting our environment as more and more people come to this corner of Eden. We're going to put more stress on our waterways, on our green spaces, threats to our water quality and wildlife. And we're going to have to face these challenges without a lot of money from the state and even less money from the federal government because of this huge looming deficit. In order to succeed in meeting these challenges, I think Metro needs a new set of friends, a new set of allies, a new set of partners. It needs to go beyond simply working with local government officials, although they are important. I'm glad to have their support. It needs to reach out to neighborhood activists, neighborhood leaders, to small business owners and large business owners, to nonprofit groups, to schools, even to churches. Those are the people, the businesses, the organizations that are going to have new ideas, new information, and provide the inspiration to meet this challenge in the 21st century. And that's the kind of outreach I've been doing in my campaign. I have more than 700 people helping me with my campaign. That's donors, that's volunteers, people providing information and introduction. They are environmentalists and developers, farmers, high-tech entrepreneurs, teachers, local government officials, artists, and neighborhood activists. It's time for a change to the Metro Council in this new century. Fresh energy, fresh perspectives, new ideas, and that's what I'm going to bring to the Metro Council.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you very much, gentlemen, for enlightening debate, and I should say lightning responses as well. We have finished a bit early. Thank you all so much for being here. I look forward to seeing you next Friday when we will have Sam Adams and Nick Fish. Thank you so much. We're adjourned. Sorry to say Nick Adams and Sam Fish.
too many of us still believe in free lunches somehow or other. We think we can have things and not pay for, or have somebody else pay for them. Do you want to comment?
Well, I think there's a lot of truth to that. I think that a lot of people, particularly younger people, think that freeways and overpasses are naturally occurring events, that there's somehow arise geologically out of the ether and spring up, and then, you know, then nature erodes, you know, the holes, and then they repair themselves. So I think that there's a lot, I think that the electorate could do a lot more homework sometimes, but I do think that we do come to some sort of rough consensus many times that works. So, yes.
Carolyn Timmerman, City Club. I've got two questions. One, your opinion of the Willamette Week. And number two, since you have your column in 3 other papers, how can issues in Oregon, do you change that when you send your columns to the other ones? You send Oregon, things about Oregon to New York, or what?
Yes, well, Willamette Week is an excellent publication, and I know many of the people there, and my number one goal in life is to not have Willamette Week write anything about me. And so I'm in the publisher of Willamette Week's book group, and frankly, that's a really good place to be for me. So the other part of the question was what again? Excuse me.
About Oregon issues
Oh.
that you send. Do you send
Oh, well, I
other
do,
columns
yes.
and stuff, like
Yes.
New York? I mean, how can they be interested in something going on in Oregon?
Well, Trudeau was, obviously, but I think the answer to that question is I do 2 local cartoons a week for the Oregonian that I do not send out to my other clients, and then I do 4 national or international cartoons. Yes.
This will have to be our last question.
Okay.
Marcus Samantel, City Club member. Why is it, or how did it happen that Doonesbury is not on the editorial page of the Oregonian?
Well, I don't think it was any political decision. The fact is that we had Doonesbury on the editorial page, I think, for 2 reasons. The first was that they felt that it was so explicitly political that it couldn't be on the comics page, and number 2, it was it made a venue for people to read the editorial page more. They wanted to put Doonesbury there so more people would go to the editorial page, and so that again, no grand conspiracy. That's just how newspapers work. Another happy accident here at the Oregonian. So anyway, thank you very much for having me.
I'm sure you'll all share with me the hope that we'll continue to see Jack's cartoons in our morning paper for many, many years and give us smiles every morning for a long time. Thank you. The City Club is adjourned.